Alright, I'm going to do a simple tie, just a standard pheasant tail, a little step aside from what I've been doing lately. In the vise is a size 14 curved nymph hook. This is 0.015 lead-free wire with a gold tungsten bead. The 14 hook is a little big. I tend to not fish any of my pheasant tails or hare's ear nymphs or anything larger than a 16. I just think 14 is just way too big of an imitation for a mayfly nymph. But for camera purposes in the video, I figured a little bit of a bigger hook would be easier to see. The thread I'm using is this brown, I believe it's 14-aught nano silk. One of my favorite threads. It's really flat, really thin, but really strong. And I like these threads that lay flat on flies like pheasant tails because you can create a really nice uniform underbody, which gives you a really nice uniform and well tapered regular body. And I think that's really important. So I want to lock in my weight and create a little bit of a transition or kind of a ramp up to the weight so that all kind of sits nicely. So I'm going to bring my thread down a little bit. And what I'm going to do is rip off, I don't know, probably 5 to 6 fibers off of this pheasant tail, natural in color. And again, as we go through this, I mean, I've seen videos where there's a billion different ways to tie a pheasant tail. This is just how I do it. So I'm going to grip those fibers right in the middle, and I'm going to lock them in with 1, 2, 3 wraps specifically. And I'm going to grab each end and kind of center it on the top of the shank, and I'm going to pull towards the head of the fly as I hold both ends until I get my tail to about the length that I want, which is right about there, and then I'll tighten my thread as I hold on to those tips and work my way down the shank. That'll keep everything right on top, splaying out towards the back the way that I like, and that should be good right about there. Actually, I'll go one more right into where the bend of the hook starts, and we'll be fine. Okay, what I'm going to rib this with is just this small gold wire. So I'm going to tie this in. I try to make every wrap count and kind of plan ahead of how I'm going to do this so that I don't build up a lot of bulk. So I'm going to tie this in the back, and obviously I'm tying that in way long, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it back, and I am going to line up the end of my wire with the end of my wire. Well, the end of the weight that I put on in the beginning. And the reason why I do that is because everything gets tied in without any kind of randomness so that I can maintain the uniform underbody that I'm looking for, maintain everything that I want, and that underbody will be nice and smooth. Now, nano silk, a lot like UTC, because it lays flat, as you use it, it'll start to twist. And you can see right there where that happens. I've mentioned this in pretty much every video. I always like to take a minute and give that a little counterclockwise spin so that it goes back to laying nice and flat. And this is where you want to make sure that everything is remaining uniform. So I'm going to bring this all the way back down. And once I get back to the tail, again, I'm going to make sure that we're laying flat, so I'm going to give that a few more turns, because again, this is where I definitely don't want to build up bulk, is back at the base of the tail. So I'm going to go to my pheasant tail, and I'm going to rip off probably 5 or 6 fibers or so, which are good for this pattern. Any less, and you may run out of material and won't be able to finish the body. Any more, then it'll just kind of go all over the place. I like 5 to 6 fibers. They seem to kind of lay right on top of each other nicely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the dull side of these fibers facing me. I see one broken piece in there, so I'm going to pull that out. So I've got the dull facing me, and I'm going to tie that in right at the base of the tail with a very loose wrap, and then I'm going to tighten it. Now obviously you can see that those fibers are splaying forward, so I'm going to pull back with the same thing I did with the wire until they line up with my wire, or my underbody. Now, reason why I do that is because I leave those tips on there because the tips aren't really going to gain a lot of bulk, and it just gives me more material to tie in. So those tips will stay right on there. That's kind of twisting around the shank on me. I didn't really want that to happen, but that's fine. So if you're careful and you tie everything in, you know, with a little bit of a plan, that's what you should have as far as an underbody, nice and uniform, nicely tapered. I don't know why that focus keeps going out. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this, I'm going to mind the colorful side of the fibers. I'm going to fold that over so that the colorful side is on the outside, and I'm just going to continue to maintain tension so that they don't separate, and I am going to wind this up the shank with touching wraps. I really don't know what's going on with the focus. And now I can feel in my grip that we're starting to get a little low on material, so I'm going to be kind of careful with each wrap. As I make that wrap, I'm going to reach over and I'm going to hold it onto the hook as I grab it on the other side, because I don't want to lose it. Let me fan out a little bit. I'm going to pause this and try to fix that. Alright, hopefully it stays now. And that happened. Fantastic. If you tighten it up, you should be able to get those wraps right back. And we'll go through and finish. And remember, as you start to run out of material, I mean, you could use hackle pliers if you want, but I prefer to just hold it and just be careful. And you want to get this all the way up to one wrap beyond where you would normally want to finish your body. And the reason why is because you want to get a nice transition from body to thorax, so one extra wrap will build up a little bit of what you need. And we're going to secure that. And we're all set. Snip off the excess. Good. Okay, for the wire, we're going to counter wrap that. We want that to go against the grains of the fibers. If you do it the other way, a lot of times that's, because I use very small wire, that wire can just kind of sink into the seams in between the fibers, and you know, I don't really think it affects the look at all, but I think it definitely affects durability. So counter wrapping it, I think, is the way to go. Give it an extra couple of wraps when you get it where you want it to be. And then we'll go ahead and get that locked in. Make sure that that's locked down good and tight, or else when you start to lock it in, you'll see your wraps kind of come undone, and you don't want that to happen. All right, here's where I do something a little different. I use the thread that I used because of how small it is, how thin it is, how it lays flat. But what I really like to do at this stage is, now that my body is complete and the thread becomes a little less important, what I do is I snip that right off there. And this is obviously a step that, you know, you don't have to do. This is just something stupid that I do, and I don't really know why. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put on this UTC 70 in wine. I love this UTC wine color. And I just use it on a lot of my flies so that I can tie it off and have that color be the head of my fly. So once that's on there, we'll reintroduce our thread. Now, everything on this fly is all going to be pheasant tail. I mean, there's a bunch of things you can use for the wing case. Well, on a pheasant tail, usually it's either pheasant tail itself or you can use Swiss straw. I just use pheasant tail for the tail, the body, the wing case, everything. I like a big, thick, prominent wing case, so I go with probably about 8 to 10 fibers. Cut those off square and get a loose wrap on there. and clamp it down so it doesn't go anywhere. And what I do is I'll peel that forward, and I'm going to go back on top of my body just a tiny little bit with one thread wrap so that you get a nice transition from body to thorax. And that should be good. Alright, now for the thorax, you can use a number of different things. I personally like to use, if I can grab a tuft of it, the ice dubbing has a color that's called pheasant tail. It's just pheasant tail ice dubbing. I use that quite a bit. But you can also use, just regular brown dubbing. I use regular brown possum for this. So I tie these with either this pheasant tail stuff or regular brown dubbing. If it's a bright sunny day, I'll use this stuff with the flash in it so the sun catches it. If it's not a nice bright sunny day, I'll just use the regular brown dubbing. And those are really my other two. Those are really the only two things I use. But I mean, you can use a ton of things. You can use pretty much any dubbing on here. You can use peacock curl, number of things. So get a nice tight noodle on there. Get a couple of really good firm wraps with a little bit of bulk right where you're going to start your wing case. I'm a little short on dubbing, so I'll throw a little bit more on there. Just to fill in that little gap right there. Good. Alright, now for the step I've always hated. Ever since I started tying, I've always hated this step. I've never been very good at legs. They always seem to come out, crooked, and I've seen all the techniques, and I really admire when, people are able to just lay a feather on there and it just comes out to two perfect legs. I don't really know how they pull that off. But the way I do it, or at least try to do it, is I notch out a partridge feather, and once that's notched out, what I'll do is kind of line that up. I'll get the side closest to me. I'll get that clamped right down right where I want it. I'll get the other side locked in where I want it. I give that a good squeeze so that I can get a loose wrap on there. And then I really, really clamp down and get that secured. And I hold on to it so that it doesn't twist as I tighten it up. And then just kind of take a look at it, make sure that it's sitting the way you want it to sit. And that looks pretty good. So you can obviously take scissors to this, but once I get close to the bead, I just go with a razor blade. A lot of times the scissor next to the bead can give you a little bit of errant material sticking up, and I like a nice clean finish to my flies, so I want to avoid that. So you get a nice clean cutoff with a razor blade. So now we're going to take our wing case, make sure that you maintain that colorful side facing you. Get that folded over the top. It doesn't have to be perfect for the first wrap. I can see that I skimmed my thread with the razor blade, and if I put a lot of pressure it's going to snap, so I'm going to be careful here. Just get a couple of wraps in there until that's good to go. And same exact thing. I'm going to take the razor blade. I want to eliminate any kind of errant fiber, so I'm going to lay that down flat. Angle it so you don't cut your thread. And get your wing case cut off cleanly. And I'm going to finish this with a little bit of a wine collar. As I said, I really, really like this color thread. Give it a whip finish. And you're good. So like I said, there's a number of ways to tie this pattern. I've seen a lot of different techniques. Got a little bit of errant thread there on this side. That's the way I do it, but I think regardless of what technique you're using, this focus is killing me. I just think paying attention to that uniform underbody is a really important piece. But it's a classic fly. It's in everybody's box. I make sure that I have a whole bunch of these, and that's how I do it. And obviously you can change the color of the thorax, do a number of different things, but that's how I tie my pheasant tails. Okay, thanks.